Voicemail came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, while I was elbow deep in a contract revision that wasn't going to review itself. My husband's voice, slightly lower than usual. Hey, I'm going to be stuck in Austin through Thursday now. The Meridian deal needs another round. Don't wait up. I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to the contract. We'd been married 9 years. I knew what the Meridian deal sounded like when it was real. He'd pace the kitchen, run his hands through his hair, leave half-eaten sandwiches on the counter. This voicemail had none of that. Smeal had none of that. It was smooth, rehearsed. The kind of tone you use when you've said the same sentence 3 times in the mirror. I didn't say anything to him that night. I didn't say anything the next morning either, when he texted a photo of a hotel breakfast and added 3 exclamation points after, "Miss you guys." Our daughter Hallie was 8. She texted back a drawing she'd made of our dog. I watched the exchange from across the kitchen and thought, he didn't ask how her science project went. He always asked about the science project. I work in commercial real estate law. I've spent 11 years reading documents that people wrote carefully to hide what they actually meant. I know the difference between an omission and a lie. I know when something is technically true and fundamentally false. So when I say that I knew something was wrong before I had a single piece of evidence, I need you to understand that's not intuition, that's pattern recognition. I hired a private investigator 4 days later. His name was a referral from a colleague who handled high-conflict divorces. He was unremarkable looking, which I suspected was intentional, and he asked me very few questions. He said he'd have something for me within 2 weeks. It took 9 days. The file arrived as a secure link to a folder. I opened it at my desk on a Friday afternoon after my assistant had left and the office was quiet. I made myself a cup of coffee first. I don't know why. Some kind of ritual, maybe. Something to hold. There were 43 photographs. My husband wasn't in Austin. He was in Scottsdale. Specifically, he was at a private wellness and recovery residence on the north side, the kind of place that doesn't advertise, that has a discreet sign at the entrance and charges by the week. In the photographs, he was arriving, leaving, arriving again, always with the same woman. She was dark-haired, maybe 30, and in several of the photos she was visibly pregnant. In the last photograph, she was wearing a ring. Not a new ring, not a we're in love ring, a specific kind of ring, simple band, worn position, left hand, the kind of ring you wear when you want people to assume something without being asked directly. I closed the folder. I finished my coffee. Then I called my friend Petra. Petra is not a divorce attorney. She's a forensic accountant, and she has been my closest friend since our first year of law school, when we were both surviving on gas station sushi and shared a hatred of a particular contracts professor. She is methodical, unsentimental, and deeply loyal, and when I called her that Friday evening, she picked up on the second ring and said, "Tell me." So I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been noticing?" "A few months of something being wrong. 4 days of knowing." "Okay," she said, "don't move anything yet. Don't touch the joint accounts. Don't say a word to him. I'm coming over Saturday morning and we're going to look at everything." I said, "He'll be home Sunday." "I know," she said. "Saturday." Petra arrived at 8 in the morning with 2 coffees and a laptop bag, and the calm, focused energy of someone who has been waiting for a problem she could actually solve. We sat at the dining room table while Hallie was at her weekend soccer practice, and Petra walked me through 9 years of our financial life, the way a surgeon describes what she's about to remove. What she found took about 3 hours to reconstruct. Over the previous 22 months, my husband had been slowly, methodically repositioning money. Not dramatically, nothing that would trigger a flag, nothing that would show up as a sudden transfer. Small amounts moved with the patience of someone who assumed the other person wasn't paying attention. A consulting fee here, a professional development expense there, a joint investment account we'd opened together that he'd been making quiet withdrawals from, always under the threshold that would generate a notification. The total, as best Petra could calculate, was somewhere between $210,000 and $240,000. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I said, he was building a life. Petra looked at me. Yes. This wasn't an affair that got complicated. He planned this. It looks that way. The Scottsdale residence wasn't a random choice. He'd been paying the lease on a property there for 14 months. The woman, I didn't know her name yet, and I made a deliberate choice not to look, had been living there apparently for most of that time. He visited when he had business trips. He had several a year. I thought about the hotel breakfast photo, the 3 exclamation points. I thought about Hallie drawing our jog. I thought about my son Micah, who was 12 and had recently started going quiet at dinner in a way I'd chalked up to middle school. I wondered now how much he'd noticed. Kids notice everything. They just don't have language for it yet. I did not cry in front of Petra. I cried later in the shower for about 4 minutes, and then I stopped and made myself think clearly. I'm a commercial real estate attorney in the state of Arizona. I know exactly how marital asset law works. I know what dissipation of marital assets means, legally. I know what documentation looks like when it's presented to a judge versus when it's presented to a spouse as a surprise on Sunday evening. I had one weekend. I made 3 calls on Saturday afternoon. The first was to an attorney, a woman who had been referred to me twice by colleagues in the past 2 years, always with the same description. She doesn't lose. Her name was posted on a firm website that was aggressively plain. No stock photos of happy families. Just credentials and a phone number. I left a message. She called back in 40 minutes. I explained the situation in 15 minutes, the way I would explain a case file. She asked 4 questions. Then she said, "Can you come in Monday morning?" Yes. Don't confront him before then. I know. And don't move any joint assets yourself. Even in response, I need to be able to show the court a clean record of what he did. Understood. The second call was to my mother, who lives 20 minutes away and has never, in my memory, asked an unnecessary question. I told her I might need her to take the kids for a few days starting next week. She said, "Of course. Do you need me to come now?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "I love you." I said, "I know, thank you." The third call was to the school district's enrollment office. I left a message asking about the process for modifying emergency contact and pickup authorization records. Then I made dinner, helped Hallie with her reading log, listened to Micah describe a YouTube video about deep-sea fish for 25 minutes, and went to bed. My husband came home Sunday around 4 in the afternoon, rolling his carry-on through the front door with the practiced ease of someone returning from a real trip. He kissed me on the cheek. He ruffled Hallie's hair. He asked Micah about the game. I watched him. I watched the way he moved through the kitchen like a man who had already, somewhere in the back of his mind, stopped living there. The way he opened the refrigerator and closed it without taking anything. The way his eyes went to his phone twice before he'd even taken off his shoes. 9 years. We built this together. The house, the kids, the Sunday dinners, the inside jokes that no one else would understand. He had looked at all of that and decided it was something he could quietly dismantle, piece by piece, from the inside. I set his plate on the table and said, "How was the flight?" "Fine," he said. "Delayed, but fine." I nodded. After dinner, after the kids were in bed, he sat on the couch with his laptop, and I sat in the armchair across from him with a book I wasn't reading, and I thought about the photographs. 43 of them. The ring on her finger. I thought, he doesn't know that I know, and right now, that is the only advantage I have, and I am not going to waste it. Monday morning, I dropped the kids at school and drove to the attorney's office. She was exactly what I'd expected. Compact, precise, the kind of woman who has probably never made a decision impulsively in her professional life. We sat across from each other, and she went through the documents Petra had helped me compile. And as she read, her expression didn't change, but her pen moved faster. When she finished, she set the folder down and said, "He dissipated significant marital assets over a sustained period with clear intent. Combined with the financial documentation your friend compiled, we have a strong case for an unequal division in your favor." In Arizona, that's not automatic. The court has discretion, but dissipation cases with this level of documentation tend to go one way. I said, "What about the property in Scottsdale?" "If it was purchased or leased using marital funds during the marriage, it's a marital asset. or at minimum, it's evidence of dissipation. Either way, it works for you. He hasn't told me he wants a divorce. She looked at me steadily. He doesn't have to. You can file. I filed that afternoon. What followed was not fast. I want to be clear about that because there's a version of this story that happens in a clean montage. File, confront, he falls apart, justice is served in 90 days. That is not what happened. What happened was, my attorney filed a petition. A temporary orders hearing was scheduled. My husband was served at his office on a Wednesday morning. I know because his assistant called me, confused, an hour later, and I told her that if she had questions, she should direct them to his attorney. He called me 4 times that day. I let them go to voicemail. That evening, he came home early. The kids were still at my mother's, which he didn't know yet. He walked into the kitchen, and I was sitting at the table with a glass of water, and he stood in the doorway and looked at me the way a man looks when he realizes the room has been rearranged while he wasn't watching. He said, "You filed?" "Yes." He sat down across from me. He looked, I'm going to be honest, he looked more tired than guilty, like someone who had been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and had finally been allowed to set it down, except the setting down had gone badly. He said, "How long have you known?" "Long enough." I was going to. He stopped. "What?" I said. "Tell me, when?" He didn't answer. I said, "I'm not interested in that conversation right now. What I'm interested in is that our children are 9 and 12 and they deserve to have their lives disrupted as minimally as possible, and I need to know if you're willing to work toward that or not." He looked at the table. He said, "Yes." "Then talk to your attorney. Mine will be in touch." I stood up, put my glass in the sink, and went to bed. The next few weeks were a particular kind of difficult that I don't have a better word for than administrative. There was paperwork, there were conversations about the house. We agreed, eventually, that it would be listed, and the proceeds split after the dissipation calculation, which his attorney did not love, but which he agreed to, perhaps because he understood that a court might give him considerably less. There were conversations about the children's schedule, their schools, their routines. Micah found out on a Sunday afternoon when my husband and I sat down with both kids in the living room and said the things you're supposed to say. Hallie cried. Micah didn't. He sat very still and then said, "Are you both going to stay in Arizona?" We said yes. He nodded. He said, "Okay." Then he went to his room. Later that night I knocked on his door. He was at his desk, earbuds in. I sat on the edge of his bed and waited. Eventually, he took one earbud out. I said, "You can ask me anything." He thought about it. He said, "Did you know for a long time and not tell us?" I said, "No. When I found out, I moved quickly." He looked at me for a moment, then he said, "Good." He put the earbud back in. I sat there for another few minutes, then kissed the top of his head and left. Hallie came into my room at 2 in the morning that same night and climbed into bed next to me without saying anything. I put my arm around her. She smelled like the lavender shampoo she'd been obsessed with since she was 6. After a while she said, "Is it because of me and Micah? Did we do something?" I said, "No, absolutely not. You and Micah are the best things that ever happened to me. This is not about you." She was quiet. She said, "Is there someone else?" I said, "That's something your dad can answer when you're ready to ask him." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I kind of already knew something was wrong." I said, "I know, baby." She fell asleep before I did. I lay there in the dark and thought about the fact that my daughter, 9 years old, lavender shampoo, soccer on Saturdays, had been carrying that quiet dread by herself for months, triangulating silences and tracking the distance in a room the way children do, because they are always watching and they understand far more than we give them credit for. I thought about what that kind of uncertainty does to a kid, how it sits in the body, how it shapes the way you move through a world you've started to suspect might shift without warning. I made myself a promise that night. I was going to make sure that whatever came next, my children knew exactly where the ground was. Solid, present, reliable. Whatever else fell apart, that part wouldn't. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I filed. The settlement included an unequal division of assets. The court agreed that the documented dissipation warranted it. The Scottsdale property was accounted for in the calculation. The retirement accounts were divided with an offset in my favour. The house sold. After the dissipation adjustment, I received a larger share of the equity. His attorney had argued at one point that some of the transfers were business-related and that Petra's analysis overstated the amount. My attorney put Petra on the stand. Petra is an extremely good witness. She does not get rattled and she does not simplify things incorrectly. The argument did not land. I moved into a smaller house 20 minutes from the kids' schools, close enough to my mother that Hallie can ride her bike there. It has a good yard and a specific kind of quiet that I had forgotten I was allowed to want. Micah started seeing a therapist last fall, not because anything is acutely wrong, but because he's 12 and his family restructured, and I wanted him to have somewhere to put things that I'm not the right person to receive. He mentioned, after his third session, that his therapist taught him a breathing thing that was actually useful. I considered that a win. Hallie made the travel soccer team. She told me on the drive home from tryouts, bouncing in the passenger seat, and I had to pull over because I was laughing and crying at the same time and it didn't seem safe to keep driving. She thought that was very funny. My husband sees the kids on a schedule we negotiated and have mostly kept to. He is not a villain in the version of this story I tell my children. He is their father and they love him, and what he did to me is not something I need them to carry. What happened between us is mine to process, not theirs to absorb. But I would be lying if I said there weren't moments. In those first months, when the specific shape of his absence felt enormous. 9 years. A whole architecture of daily life dismantled. The way the house sounded different when half the dishes were gone. The way Sunday mornings reconfigured themselves around a space where something used to be. Grief is strange. It isn't always for the thing you wanted to keep. Sometimes it's for the version of yourself that didn't know yet. I'm telling this story because someone I know slightly, a woman I'd seen at school pick up a handful of times, sent me a message about 6 months ago. She'd heard, through the particular and unavoidable telegraph of a small community, that I'd been through a divorce. She was in the early part of what I recognised immediately, from the way she described it, as the same thing. She said, I feel like I'm going crazy, like I'm the only one who can see that something's wrong and I can't prove it, and every time I think I'm overreacting, another thing happens. I wrote back. I told her, you're not overreacting. Pattern recognition is real. Trust what you know. Then I told her to document everything before she said a single word out loud. She filed 8 weeks later. I don't know how her case is going. I hope it's going well. I think about that conversation sometimes, the particular loneliness of knowing something is wrong before you can name it, of sitting across from someone at dinner and smiling and passing the salt and holding an entire private universe of dread in your chest with nowhere to put it. What I want to say to anyone in that place is this: the ground is there. It's solid. You just can't see it yet because you're still in the air. You will land. And when you do, you'll be surprised to find that the landing is survivable, that you can build something after, that Sunday mornings eventually become yours again. The silence in them different, the coffee a little better, the light through the kitchen window doing exactly what it did before, because the light never cared about any of it. It just keeps coming in. The thing nobody tells you about betrayal is that it doesn't arrive as a single moment. It arrives as a pattern you finally let yourself see. I think about the voicemail a lot, the smoothness of it, the rehearsed ease. For a long time I've been telling myself that noticing things wasn't the same as knowing things, that I needed proof before I was allowed to trust my own read of a room. What I understand now is that the two aren't as separate as I thought. Noticing is a form of knowing. 11 years of reading contracts written to obscure the truth had trained me to see the gap between what was said and what was meant. I just hadn't been applying that skill at home. That's the first thing I'd tell anyone in the place I was in. The thing you sense but can't name yet is real. Your body is running calculations your conscious mind hasn't caught up to. Don't dismiss that. Pay attention to it. And when the evidence comes, document it before you speak, because speaking first only closes doors. Petra saved me in ways I'm still accounting for. Not because she did anything I couldn't have done eventually, but because she did it quickly, and with a clarity I didn't have access to in those first hours. She looked at 9 years of financial records and didn't flinch. She built a case out of what someone else had assumed was invisible. That kind of friendship, the kind that shows up with a laptop and 2 coffees and doesn't need you to explain your feelings before it starts solving the problem. That is not small. I don't think I've ever told her adequately what those 2 days meant. What my husband didn't understand, I think, is that the same mind he'd shared a house with for 9 years, the one that had built a career on reading the fine print, was still running, even when I seemed not to be paying attention. He'd mistaken my stillness for absence. He'd moved money in amounts small enough to avoid notifications and assumed that was the same as invisible. It wasn't. It was just unexamined. There's a difference. And that matters, not as a point of pride, but as something worth sitting with. The choices we make quietly, over time, compound. His had been compounding for 22 months. So had mine. Every deposition I'd prepped, every contract I'd read with precision, every year of building a professional life that meant I had resources and networks, and a forensic accountant for a best friend. Neither of us arrived at that Friday afternoon by accident. I watch Micah now, the way he listens before he speaks, the way he asks the exact right question at the exact right moment, and I think he is going to be okay, not because the hard thing didn't happen, but because he moved through it honestly and came out still himself. That's what I want for both of my kids. Not a life without difficulty, but the capacity to meet difficulty without losing their integrity or their nerve. Hallie made the travel team. She has no idea yet what a thing that is. To want something hard and work for it and get it. Someday she'll have that to draw on when the harder things come. The light still comes through the kitchen window in the morning. I notice it differently now, the way it falls across the counter. Ordinary and exact and entirely indifferent to everything that changed in this house. That used to feel like a small grief. Now it just feels like mourning. I'm still here. That's not nothing. That's everything, actually.